when I've studied the subject, I encountered, and I'm sure you've experienced this, there's sort of like small tent Arminianism, think classical Arminianism, someone who's trying to stay in the same vein as Arminius. Then there's big tent Arminianism. So even you mentioned, for example, with election, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned corporate election first rather than the classical view of election based on divine foreknowledge of what people will choose. That addition of corporate election, that's a newer development. At what point is Arminianism just big tent Arminianism? And how big is the tent? Because at a certain point, that big tent simply becomes non-Calvinism.
Yeah, fair enough. So that's a good question. So in terms of corporate election, I understand what you're saying. You can find some of the concepts in Arminius and Episcopius and in the Remonstrant Brotherhood and stuff like that, but it wasn't articulated so clearly. But there's aspects of it that you're going to definitely glean from them. One of the more prominent early adopters within the Arminian camp was Robert Schenck. His book Elect and the Son, and there you're going to see a pretty clear connection between historic Arminianism, but with the nuance of corporate election.
Yeah.
Today, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find too many people within the Society of Evangelical Arminians that don't see election as corporate in some sense. Maybe they've held on to foreknowledge-based election, but they've added to it much more corporate concepts.
Yeah, so those are logically compatible, of course. You know, you might say, well, there's corporate election and there's individual election. So I guess my concern is for someone like myself, I affirm corporate election, but I would reject the priority of individual election. So I think an individual is elect insofar as they choose to be part of the corporate group. And that strikes me as not classical Arminianism. And my worry is that why take on a label if it's just becomes non-Calvinism?
Okay, yeah, so fair enough. That's a great question. So I don't know. Most people within SEA are not so concerned about that. Now, you could make an argument, oh, well, if you hold a corporate election, you're not Arminian because Arminius himself held to some type of foreknowledge-based election. Then it really comes down to, well, how precise is it? I mean, does a Calvinist has to agree with Calvin on everything in the Institutes?
Right.
So now you're saying, well, what is the perimeter fence that outlines Arminianism?
Right.
You mentioned the facts outline. That's probably the best candidate I can think of. So if you agree with the facts outline, you are. Now, I think the question will often come up. It certainly came up, I remember, in the formation of the Society of Evangelical Arminians. There was some debate amongst the people that would end up being leaders, and I don't want to put too much in the street, but the question came up, well, what about open theism? That's a good question. Does that fit within the boundary fence of Arminians or not? Then the question came up with, what about liberal theology? If somebody denies inerrancy, can they be an Arminian? That sort of thing. And the solution we came up with is, let's come up with evangelical Arminianism and put some fence posts around so we can know who exactly we are. From that standpoint, I think it's fair to define. Outside of that, if other people want to call themselves Arminian, that's certainly cool, but the Society of Evangelical Arminians has a well-defined statement of faith that members are to hold to. I think with the rise of provisionism, the question also came up there, but it actually had already been pre-settled that we do affirm total depravity, at least to some extent. And although we certainly don't mean everything that Calvinists mean by that, but we do hold to some fundamental aspects of total depravity, for sure. And it was enough that it conflicted with Dr. Flowers' view and provisionism in general. Now, the reciprocal is not true. The way I understand the provisionist outline, the provide acrostic, I think I fit within it.
Interesting.
Truth and labeling, I think I'm a provisionist because their definitions are broad. But if I hop on Twitter and just start expressing total depravity, they'll come at me.
Yeah.
So there's like a theoretical and a practical. There really is. And so I think some of the questions you're asking about the corporate side, it's a head scratcher. It's interesting, but I would say that from a practical standpoint, that would not at all rule you out by anyone that I know.
Yeah, well, so you had mentioned that the provisionist acrostic or acronym. Every week I mentioned that I'm not sure I know the difference between the two, acrostic or acronym. So for the facts, it would be conditional election, right? And so the conditional nature of it could be based on God's foreknowledge of what they will choose, or it could be conditioned on the individual choosing to be part of a corporate group. So under that broad definition of conditional election, now I'd have to read the specifics. I'd have to check out the statement of faith at your site. I'd have to see if I could. But under the broad view of just the acronym, I could affirm that. Right? So I could affirm the corporate model that it is conditioned based on what the individual chooses. But my worry is similar to the worry maybe that you have with provisionism, that it's so broad you could affirm it, but in practice, you're still butting heads with the provisionists because a large lot of them believe narrower things about, say, nature of man, that there's disagreement.
Well, I'll just offer the president, Dr. Brian Abbassiano, is probably one of the leading proponents of corporate election without a foreknowledge-based component. And I think, and I don't want to misspeak, but I think all 5 of the officers for SEA agree with you also. You'd have plenty of allies. In fact, I don't know anyone that is foreknowledge only. It's always like a both and if they hold a foreknowledge-based election at all. But your background, you have a strong background in church history. I like church history a lot too, and I appreciate the fact that a lot of the fathers held a foreknowledge-based election.
Yeah.
So of course the main thing are the exegesis of the 2 passages, right? With 1 Peter 1:2 and Romans 8:29. But in addition to that, I appreciate the fact that the fathers saw those 2 passages as teaching foreknowledge-based election and integrated into their overall system.
Yeah, you are right. The church fathers do hold to that, and I think they just get it wrong. I think they lose their cultural ear pretty quickly on that issue. They're trying to answer the same sort of questions traditional Protestants and some people today are trying to answer, and they're just asking the wrong questions on the text.